Hello, everybody. I'm Skylar Rogers, and I'm from FormAssembly. We're settling in for working with person accounts in Salesforce. Uh, this is a really interesting topic. I'm glad we brought this one up this month. Whether you're kind of new to this topic or leaning in because it's something your company works with, yeah, we're going to be talking about some specific setup there, as you can see on the slide here, ways to get involved in your campaigns, and of course, how to get involved with your existing FormAssembly integration. But thankfully, you don't have to hear only me ramble on about that. I've got a great guest with me as always. Joelle, how's it going?
Hey, Skylar, it's going good. Yes, I'm so excited to talk to you guys about how to use person's accounts in your Form Assembly accounts. A couple of housekeeping notes though before we kind of get started. Don't worry, this will be recorded. And then also at any point, there is a Q&A box. You can go ahead and type anything in there. Is there any housekeeping notes I'm missing, Skylar?
Yeah, I was like, you'll hear me shout these out later as well, but On24 gives us a nice little sort of resources section for you as well. So if anything sounds interesting today, we've got a couple additional resources to help you kind of jump into this topic more right there in that resources area. But yeah, we'll call those out probably towards the end as well.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, then we can go ahead and get started. I don't know if I said my position, but I'm the product trainer here. And so I get to come in and talk to all of our lovely customers and help them learn more about how to use their Form Assembly accounts. So today we're going to talk about those person's accounts. And before we get started, I want to just know how many of everyone has used person's accounts with their Form Assembly Salesforce connectors before. This is something that is a very kind of case-by-case basis, but it is such a great way to use your Salesforce account if you've enabled the person's accounts in your Salesforce account. But they are a little particular. So I'm curious to see how many people have done
Yeah.
it.
It really is a very specific topic, but yeah, hearing you talk about it, Joel, as we were setting up the content, really is one of those great examples of like, wow, people's organizations' Salesforce instances can vary so much in the way they set it up and the kinds of data that flow in and out of it. And the Form Assembly Salesforce integration has been around so long that we've seen so many like real specific use cases and unique kind of setups. And this is one of those topics, right? That's like maybe people didn't know to think about this with their integrations, but once you do, and once you like really peer into it, it really is one of those topics or facets of it that opens up a lot in terms of like what the integration can do or how it can kind of better serve your organization. So yeah, curious to see what people will say here and what they see in the demos later.
Yeah, let's go ahead and see what they've
Yeah.
said. Okay, so we've got about 50% that have never used it, but we do also have a good chunk that have used it and a couple not sure. So that's actually really like, I'm happy to get that you guys have come here. If you haven't used it, then that way you can kind of see how it works on the Form Assembly side. And then those of you that have used person's accounts in the Form Assembly Salesforce connectors, hopefully you can learn a thing or two more here today. So today, what we're going to cover is just like a quick overview of what person's accounts are and kind of how they work in the back end so that we can then use that with our configuration and a couple of reasons of why and when and why you'd use those person's accounts for anyone that hasn't used them before. Then we'll get into a few demos where I'll go through how to use those person's accounts in Form Assembly. This is going to be really that methodology of using them so that you can then take that and run with it with all of your different ways that you want to use them with Form Assembly and Salesforce. And ending up with some pro tips of using person accounts with Form Assembly. And to wrap it all up, we'll have a final question and answer session where we can answer any of the questions that you guys submit. But don't worry, as we're going through, we've got Kayla Condello here, our Knowledge and Training Manager, and she'll be trying to answer some of those questions as we go through. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with that foundation of what is a person account. So person accounts are a type of Salesforce record that can be used to identify an individual rather than a business when working with them. Given that you're attending and registered for this webinar, I'm going to make the assumption that you're already using them, but whether you have or haven't, let's talk a bit about the behind the scenes of how person's account work so we can use that knowledge with them in Form Assembly. At a high level, Salesforce uses two of its most popular standard objects when it comes to persons' accounts and contacts. Accounts typically represent companies and store things like organization name, identity, and other business details, while contacts represent individuals associated with those companies and they're linked back to the account. These are going to be separate objects, which is important for things like reporting, as you can analyze those accounts and contacts independently. A person account essentially combines these two. On the surface, it looks like a single record with blended fields. But behind the scenes, Salesforce is still maintaining both an account record and a contact record for that single person account. This knowledge matters, especially when you start working with FormAssembly connectors, because we directly interact with those underlying records. And this hybrid structure is what makes person accounts so flexible. They allow you to have that account and behave like accounts when it comes to ownership, relationships, and reporting, but they also include the detailed individual field level data you'd expect from a contact. This becomes especially useful if your organization works with a mix of individuals and businesses, or even if you're focused entirely on individuals, but still rely on Salesforce's account net framework. Now, you might notice that person accounts and business accounts look quite different when you're interacting with them in Salesforce. They have different fields, layouts, and even user experiences. So how does Salesforce manage that if they're built from the same underlying pieces? The answer is going to be those record types. And for record types, they determine how a record behaves, what fields are visible, how the page is laid out, and what kind of data the record is meant to represent. When you open a business account, you'll see those fields relevant to a company. When you open a person account, you'll see additional fields that come from the contact side. And each record type has a unique record ID. This becomes especially important when you're creating or interacting with records in FormAssembly. That record type ID is what tells Salesforce what kind of account you're working with in FormAssembly. For example, a specific record type ID signals that an account should behave as a person account rather than a business account. We'll come back to this when we talk about configuring FormAssembly connectors to work with persons accounts. For now, the key takeaway is even though you see a single person account record, Salesforce is still using both an account and a contact behind the scenes and relying on record types to control how that record appears and behaves. Understanding that underlying foundation helps explain not just how persons accounts work, but why some organizations may choose to use them. Most commonly, it's because they're working with individuals instead of companies, or with people that function as both, such as donors or contractors or partners. Those people that they're going to have a kind of one-on-one relationship that are also the business. Then persons accounts also simplify data management and that user experience. So instead of jumping between page to page when you have an account and a contact, you're able to interact and change everything just on that one person account page. And most importantly, they offer flexibility. You can have the best of both worlds of the accounts and contacts. You can use them in account-based reporting and the contact-based reporting and allow you to just really be able to take advantage of both of those Salesforce objects. So that's the big picture. Let's take a look at how all of this functions in FormAssembly. So give me just a moment to share my screen, and then we can get started with the first demo. So for today, the first thing that we're going to do is create a person account in my Salesforce connector. Now I'm using the Salesforce workflow connector, but this will work the same with our Form native Salesforce connector. So if you haven't seen that before, don't worry, we can take that account as well. So here in the connector, we're going to go ahead and just create a record. Now, whenever you're creating a person account, if you just type in person account, you'll notice it doesn't show. And that's because for FormAssembly, it's going to be an account. And with this account, after we've created it, this is where the mapping is going to be where it really gets into the point where you say, hey, this is going to be in a person account. And to do that, we're going to pull in to our Salesforce field the record type ID. And instead of a form field, this will be a value or formula. And that's going to be how we tell what type of account should be created in our Salesforce. Now, remember how we said earlier, those record types control page layouts, required fields, pick list values, and other overall behavior. So this is going to be where we're going to say, okay, great. We have persons accounts and business accounts. We need to tell, from FormAssembly, we need to tell which type of account we're using to Salesforce. So to find that in Salesforce, I'm going to come here into my object manager, and I'm going to find that person object. And this is going to be something that is automatically created whenever you enable persons accounts for your Salesforce. And here I need to get the record type ID. Now to find the record type ID, I'm going to go up to the link up top of my Salesforce. And if we go all the way to the end of the link, we can then see the record type ID. Maybe, if it'll let me go. Okay, if you scroll all the way to the end, there we go. Okay, sorry, I was a little bit ahead of myself. Okay, so we go to the record types ID, and then from there, getting ahead of myself a little bit, you'll see that person's account. So we'll click on that. We'll see that person's account record type. And then now, if we go to the end, if the link will work with me, there is the person account record type ID. So we'll just copy that. And then we come back into FormAssembly. We'll just paste that right in. And I can go ahead and add any additional fields that I want to my person account. One thing that I always like to do is that first name and last name. That's going to be added fields for the person account. So mapping those will let me say, hey, great, this is the person's name and their last name. And then finally, we'll just add in that email, and that's going to be that person account email as well. And so those are going to be specific fields that were added to the account record and object for those person accounts. So we are able to then save this, and now whenever this form or workflow is submitted, it's going to create a person account in my Salesforce. Now, let's talk about something else that comes up and avoiding those duplicate records. So we've seen how to create it. What about if we want to look up or update a person account? How do we do that? Because obviously sometimes those already exist in our Salesforce. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll just delete that action and add a new action. And we're going to do a lookup a account record. And this lookup query is going to be where we're going to say, hey, we're looking for a person account rather than a business account. So we're going to add in a condition. I'm going to do the record type IDs, and that's going to equal a value or formula. And I'm going to paste in that record type ID that we found from Salesforce right there. And then I'm going to add the additional lookup query for email. That's my unique identifier that's going to be found in the form as well, but you can use any other lookup criteria you'd like. The record type ID is going to be that most important one that you're going to want to use every time you have a lookup. And this is going to be the same concept of either you're looking up the person account or updating. You'll use the same type of lookup query. And it just basically acts as like a safety filter. So even if there is a business account with the same email or same other lookup criteria, FormAssembly will just look specifically at your person's accounts and only pull those up when you're trying to update or look up a person account. And you can use that to help avoid that duplicate data, any conflicting data, or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and finish doing the lookup criteria, setting those matching, and we can move to our last example, and that's going to be connecting person accounts to other objects. So in Salesforce, occasionally you'll have some objects that do not connect to accounts at all. And so what happens when you try to connect to a person's account in FormAssembly? So in FormAssembly, you can see we're connecting to that account record. And some objects, like the campaign member, which we're going to use as the example today, does not connect to account objects. And if you try to connect a campaign member record to an account, you're going to get an error saying incorrect record type. So what do we do and how do we connect those person's accounts? And with that, we're going to kind of remember when I said there were two records in the backend, we're going to use the account lookup here to locate that contact ID that's stored in the backend of Salesforce to be able to use it here in our FormAssembly connector. So I've got that action we just configured with the lookup account record. Then I'm going to come here to the mapping. I'll add a mapping. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pull in the account ID into a variable, account ID. And so then now my FormAssembly workflow is pulling that account ID and saving it. And then I can add another action. And with this action, what I'm going to do is look up my contact record for the person account. That's going to be what this is going to be specifically. It's going to be that person account contact record that's in the back end of Salesforce. So we'll look up that contact. And now for the lookup query, this is going to be really easy for us because all we have to do is we have that account ID that's automatically added to the contact record. And we're going to look at the account ID variable we just created. And then we'll continue with our matching rules. And there's that. So it'll now find that contact record that's on the back end of the person account. And for the mapping, all we need to do is come in here and I'm going to pull in the contact ID. And again, save that as a variable, contact ID. And now I can then add my action for any of those objects that don't connect to accounts. For this one, we're going to use the campaign member, but if anyone that you are using that you're like, okay, great, it says an account connect to accounts and my FormAssembly is throwing errors, you can connect to that contact record here. So we'll do that and we'll just create that campaign member record. So we've got that. The campaign ID is going to be this one right here that I've already got, and it's going to be a value. And we'll just add in and go through. So when I open and add, you can see I don't have the option to add an account ID to this campaign member record. So I have just the contact ID, but that is perfect because we've got that contact ID variable right there. And with that, I can go ahead and just save this real fast, and we can go ahead and submit a quick response so that we can see that being created in my campaign in Salesforce. So we'll do JSON test. And he just needs the one ticket for the event and no donation and no token table. So submit. I don't think I clicked save. That's okay. There we go. But when we go into our Salesforce, so here is my campaign right there. And there is my earlier contact from Heidi Test. And if we click on her, we can see she is actually a person account, but she's listed on the campaign as a contact. So that is how you set up the person's accounts to create those campaign member records. But yeah, so before we wrap up, let's kind of share a few quick pro tips about working with persons accounts in the FormAssembly Salesforce connectors. And so the first thing is don't forget to use those record type IDs. If you leave it out, Salesforce is going to default to the business account. And so you're not going to see all of those person-specific fields that you need. And that's kind of one of the most common things that I see if people are trying to use persons accounts, but not getting them created or updated correctly, is forgetting that record type ID. Then second, watch out for those person-specific account-specific fields. And so those are going to be those fields that are for the contact that appear on the person account record. And so you just want to be sure to map those. If you don't, they won't appear on that person account record. So if you want them there, be sure to map them in your connector. And third, the validation rules. Person accounts are affected by validation rules on both the account object and the contact object. So making sure that as you're mapping your person's accounts in your FormAssembly Salesforce connectors, you're making sure you're honoring your validation rules that you have set for either your person or contact objects. And with that, person's accounts and contacts are just kind of, they combine those person accounts into a hybrid contact and account records. And so you're able to use both of them with that one and get the best of both worlds. And then remembering, again, just that record type ID is required whenever you're working with them, and that controls everything that you're doing with the FormAssembly Salesforce connector. So just remember that record type ID. And if you don't want to look it up every time, save it somewhere and you can just copy and paste it. And finally, for the objects that don't connect to accounts, you'll want to use that person account ID to locate the underlying contact ID in FormAssembly so that you can connect to those objects that don't connect to account records in FormAssembly and be able to do everything that you're looking to do with them. And with that, let's go ahead and open it up for questions. I've seen a lot of good ones. Oh, let me stop sharing my screen. I didn't realize I kept sharing my screen. That's what I get for sharing the entire window.
Awesome demos there. I know you're gonna take a look at what people are asking about. Having seen those a couple times now, the thing that always strikes me is we talk to customers with pretty unique Salesforce setups, or I go to events and hear about how can we do this, or how can we solve for this particular problem. But this is one of those things that you saw Joel kind of mapping within one of our workflows, right? Like you could imagine some of the automations or some of the accounts that would automatically get updated, some of the records automatically updated, enrolling people in an ongoing campaign once they made it through that workflow or that form fill. But she didn't have to open up a terminal to code in it. We didn't have to go bug the Salesforce admins who were like already kind of overwhelmed at I imagine all of our companies, at least all the ones I've ever been, right, to create some of those mappings, like just knowing or being aware of some of those record type IDs, contact IDs. You're able to set up some of those mappings, variable creation, automations within the workflow, stuff like that. So again, I love that phrase, kind of low to no code, but we saw it go down there just in a few minutes. So awesome job, Joel, as always.
Thank you. Kayla, as you were answering some of the questions, was there anything that popped out to you that you wanted to share before we get? I think you're muted, Kayla.
Oh.
Oh, no. Okay, well, we can get started answering questions while we get Kayla's mic situation figured out.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, yeah, sorry. It decided not to connect to my microphone. Yeah, so we've got quite a few. So I'm going to just dive straight into these. We're going to start off with Lauren's here about any tips for mapping and working with party relationship groups and linking multiple person accounts together. Yes, I got tips. So basically, for those who don't know, a party relationship group is basically a way to connect a number of business accounts, person accounts, other types of accounts, connect them all together in a nice little group. The most popular one would be something like, say, household, right? Let's say we have 3-person accounts for 3 members of the Johnson family. You may want a household for the Johnson household that they all are then connected inside, right? So the way that that works is actually, if anyone's ever used campaigns and campaign members, it works like that. Basically, it's very similar, where you have something called a junction object that sits between the 2 things, is how that works. And it's called, I'm remembering the specific name. It's the there's a name for this thing. It's called the party relationship group member, I think. It's something, I think it's PRG member. But the point is, what you have to do when you're working with it with your connector is you create your person accounts first. Then you're also going to need to either create or locate that household or other party relationship group record, find its ID as well, and then create the junction object, which is that member record. And then you have it have the ID of the person account and the ID of the group, as it were. And it sits between the 2 of them and connects them. And you do it this way so that instead of having, like, let's say it's a, father, mother, child, the father having, mother and child relationships, mother having father and child having each individual parent, you instead have each of them only have one connection through that to their member record, which then connects to that group. So that's how that works. So if you ever have any trouble, feel free to reach out to our support team. But there's a lot of information out there, and including in our own help documentation on campaign members and campaign objects. It's very similar. So if you're ever wanting, like, that's actually a little easier to find resources on. So that's my other kind of little pro tip there, is you can always look for those types of resources, and it's there's another really good question here from Bree, I believe, and it's do you recommend using the record type ID in a lookup instead of the is person indicator? Yes, 100%. So the way that this works is the record type ID is used when creating the record to make it a person account to begin with. Is person is actually the indicator. So that gets checked. It's the little checkbox. It checks when you create the person account. So you can't check it to make the like the record a person account. It's the opposite directions that you create it, and then that's automatically checked. So you start with the record type ID, and then that will get checked. But if you ever do need like a dynamic pick list of person accounts or something, yeah, you actually could use that as an indicator to like pull them all in, but you don't use it when creating it, if that makes sense. So those were good ones. Here's another one from Bree also. So is it not recommended to just save the person contact ID from the account lookup? Fun fact here, Joelle was showing you a way that works in both the form connector and the workflow connector. So that method in workflow, yeah, totally. But you can't actually do that in the form connector. It's one of the benefits of our workflow connector is that ability to pull the contact ID from the located account. So that's why she showed it this way. But yeah, you totally caught on there. Yeah, you can do that. If we haven't used person accounts, can we convert existing contacts and household accounts to person accounts? Is also a really good question. So I'm going to give you a very general answer here for a reason, which is it depends highly on how your Salesforce org structure works. That's actually usually a data migration. It's not as simple as like checking a checkbox or changing the record type ID, because you have to move, like with the way the fields move around and stuff. It's usually a data migration where what you would do is you'd actually create new person accounts out of the existing accounts and contacts, and then remove the existing accounts and contacts is usually how that would work. So you would definitely want to work with like your Salesforce developer or admin on that one. But I just note that because I know that that's been asked before about like existing forms, and I actually see another one in here about existing forms and switching between like person accounts and contacts and stuff. And at the end of the day, our connector is looking at Salesforce as it is, which is a wonderful thing. You know, it means that your Salesforce permissions, restrictions, and settings and everything, our connector is looking directly at those and working with it, like right up and close. But it does mean that you can't really change that actual structure from the FormAssembly side. So if things change on the Salesforce side, obviously you then have to change the FormAssembly side, and vice versa. You wouldn't be able to change something on the FormAssembly side and have it affect your actual like structure of these things over in Salesforce, if that makes sense. So, but if you do, for example, as Cheryl is talking about here, if you do say move to NPC later this year, you may not need to rebuild all of your forms. Cloning them and just making these specific changes should actually totally work, because all of the fields are very similar, as Joelle can let you know, between accounts and contacts and person account. Like it's not going to be a massive change there, for especially for your forms. The data coming in shouldn't need to change, just the movement of it, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Like how it's going.
Yeah, exactly. So we've also got, okay, so contacts created through the FormAssembly campaign were not person accounts on their own. So Joelle, if you could answer that, Noel here just wanted to clarify, when you were creating the contacts through the FormAssembly campaign, they were not person accounts on their own. Is that correct?
So I wasn't actually creating contacts at any point. I was actually looking up that back-end contact on the person account. So whenever you're working with person's accounts in the FormAssembly Salesforce connector, you're always going to be creating an account record that is signified as a person account using that record type ID. And then what Salesforce does in the backend is it's going to also create a contact record for that. But in FormAssembly, you're just working with that account record. But if occasionally, as I mentioned, you're going to have those contacts that are necessary to look up so that you can interact with certain Salesforce objects. And to do that, you're going to do that lookup. So whenever you are working with that, Noel, just remember you're not going to be creating the contacts. That is going to be automatically done by Salesforce. And whenever you do need to interact with them, you'll just do the back end work of finding that contact ID, where someone mentioned if you're working with the workflow connector, you can look up the account ID on the action where you're looking up the person account. Or if you're working with a form native Salesforce connector, you'll follow that same process that I did today and showed you.
Awesome. So let me grab, so there's two questions in here. I'm going to address one really quick from Leah. The households specifically are slightly different from party relationship groups in the sense that party relationship groups is like the general name. I'm using household as an example, but like they're all in that same like party relationship group scenario. That's a well oversimplification of the scenario, but like that's more what I meant. But party relationship groups are something that they also come in Financial Services Cloud and I think Health Cloud. So a couple places. Leah was asking if they were only in Nonprofit Cloud. Matthew. So Matthew, you've got here an issue when it comes to repeated sections and gathering the students' like parent information and having it work with those relationships between the contacts and accounts and such. I'm going to give two notes. The first one being that when you're working with repeatable sections, it's very difficult to give like direct advice without seeing it. So I definitely recommend reaching out to our support team for that. In terms of general advice, Joelle actually just gave a fantastic webinar on this like a couple months ago on using repeatable sections with all this. So Joelle, do you have any like general tips when it comes to repeatables and relationships?
Yeah, so repeatables and relationships, whenever you're mapping any of those within an object or an action or a step, you want to only map to one repeatable section in an action or in a step. So Caleb, you mentioned that they're using parents and children or something like that. And so like if you have like a repeatable parent section and a repeatable child section, you want to have two separate actions for those. So then you'll have the repeatable child, where you only reference the repeatable action is only going to be referencing the repeatable child section and only fields within that section. And then the repeatable parent section is only going to be referencing fields in that repeatable parent section. And just keeping that really strict of like, okay, great, I'm only referencing this. And then when it comes to the relationships, that's going to matter in how you configure your Salesforce connector. So with the parent, you're going to do that one first. And with that, you'll have a dependency for that child, and you'll relate that child to the parent. So then that way, if it's like parent 1 and child B and C, it'll reference the parent 1 and each time. But definitely check out that webinar. I believe it's on our webinars page where you can check it out.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have the link right here in the resources, but just a simple search for FormAssembly webinars will take you to our webinar page, which is not only upcoming stuff, which we have some more Salesforce related webinars coming up, but yeah, you'll be able to see that back catalog. Like we said, that one was just within the last few months of this year. Of looking up and seeing some direct demonstrations of exactly what Joel was just talking about. So FormAssembly webinars is your friend there.
Absolutely. So we've got Matthew's given a little bit more detail. Okay. I'm going to give an extra bonus tip where, again, Matthew, unfortunately, without seeing it, I can't give like anything specific, obviously. And Joelle can elaborate on this very well, which is when you're working with repeatables and steps in the connector, there's a way that you need to nest them, essentially, to make it so that things repeat. So if only one thing is located, if one thing is located versus many things located, where they sit in that hierarchy really matters. And that's why we really can't give exact advice, unfortunately, because it's so heavily dependent on how you've set up that hierarchy. However, it sounds like you're in that zone. But Joelle, while I check out a couple of these other questions, do you want to just do a really quick, because especially as people are working with accounts and contacts and person accounts, if you have multiple accounts and multiple contacts that you're working with, and that's a repeatable with a repeatable inside it, like multiple contacts to an account, and that happens numerous times, how would you do that in the steps in the Salesforce connector?
So how I would do that would be to first look up the account and do the matching rules, so that then, okay, the lookup criteria is finding the correct account first off. And then for the matching rules, you kind of saw a little bit of what I did today. I would set that so that all that matches, set that so that it would pull all of them. But what it would do would be to just do it like first match, great, okay, move on to the next. And that way it will repeat. And then thinking from the Salesforce workflow connector, there's also a repeated content section that you'll want to be sure to go in and change from the default workflow to the repeated section where that account is living. If you're working with a Form Native connector, that's not quite as important. It's going to do that automatically. Then once you have that, it'll automatically run through the accounts and pull in one, perform the related steps for that one, locate the next one, perform the related steps. When you get into the nested with the contacts, that nesting is going to be where it's going to be very particular of how you're going to set it up. So with the nested, you're going to have it be a dependent action on that account record. So you'll make sure you have that dependency. I always also recommend adding a precondition of saying, hey, look at this, make sure it's not blank, just to be sure and safe. And then at the lookup, you're going to look at the variable that you are pulling from the account action and saving that account ID so that you're pulling in the contact associated to that account. And then again, just making sure that you're setting those matching rules to pull in all matches so that it'll run that repeated. And then the repeated content section, changing it from workflow to that contact repeatable section in your form in the workflow. That's going to be a very general setup. There's sometimes a little bit of extra stuff depending on how your Salesforce is configured and how everything works together. And you're using different objects, it's going to be a little bit different again. So definitely reach out to support. Those nested repeatables do kind of take a little bit of that more finesse and particular setup to get them to work.
Thank you. Wonderful stuff. So we've got a clarification, a couple of them actually. Okay. So for Lauren, for tips on working in nonprofit cloud and using party relationship groups versus account contact relationships to represent the household, I'm going to give this advice, which is that there is no right answer here at all, because it's really down to how you're interacting with these records, specifically these people. If you're using party relationship groups in order to group together a bunch of individual person accounts, that obviously has the benefits in terms of if you want to do account versus contact reporting while still being able to look at them as one whole. It really comes down to how you want to handle your reporting, how you interact with these records. Account and contact relationships are obviously the standard in Salesforce of this idea of one account and many contacts underneath it. And if that's the structure of the businesses that you're working with, and you don't need more complicated relationships, and that works with your reporting, of course, that's just such a straightforward way to move forward. But if you need those more complex relationships, those households come in at that point. So I know that sounds like I'm just brushing it away, but unfortunately and fortunately, Salesforce is extremely flexible and wildly customizable. And there was never going to be a great general answer that somebody outside of your org can give you. It's really best if you just hone in on how everyone's interacting with those records and do whatever's best for your personal scenario. And I really promise that's not brushing it off. It just, Salesforce is very flexible. Rob made a great point that yes, when you switch from regular Salesforce to person accounts, it is a one-way street. If you turn them on, you can't revert that. It is an important thing to note. Always make sure that before you turn on a Salesforce feature that it's one that you definitely want. That's pro tip there for sure.
No, I figured we might get questions like that, especially if people hadn't used or weren't sure if they were using person accounts yet. One of those links in the resources section is not our help documentation, but Salesforce's when it comes to person accounts. So might be a good jumping off point if you want to check out pros and cons of that. But yeah, again, it's not a per record basis or an easy just toggle on and off kind of deal. So make sure you know what you're doing.
Tanisha. So Tanisha was saying there's a consultant who set up the org. Is there a place to practice like a sandbox? I'm going to give a piece of advice and we'll see if Joelle has any extra pieces. But so one of the beautiful things about FormAssembly forms is that you can create as many as you would like. There is no limit there. So actually creating, and you can connect your FormAssembly forms to a Salesforce sandbox. So rather than a FormAssembly sandbox, I would actually make sure that you're using a Salesforce sandbox. You can make test versions of any of your forms, clone existing ones that you want to test with changes in Salesforce, and just connect them to that sandbox, test them out, switch it to production. Because when you do it that way, I believe personally that it is always best to test with sandbox instances of Salesforce before you make big changes, because obviously you are collecting data and putting it in there, and it can be difficult to clean if not done properly the first time. So I'm a big fan of connecting to Salesforce sandboxes with your connector, then switching it to production. But if Joelle has any extra bonus tips, definitely toss those in here.
Yes, yeah, definitely always recommend switching to a sandbox if you're testing anything. I have run into plenty of things of like, oh, well, that didn't do what I expected in Salesforce. And I'm always thankful that I have it set up to a sandbox so that whenever I am testing out things, helping customers or doing stuff of our own projects, I'm not impacting any of our data. But yeah, as far as testing with FormAssembly and seeing how that works, just getting in there, testing it out. I also love our Salesforce object reference list of if you're not sure which fields and objects you have available, that Salesforce object reference list that you can access shows the entire list of objects and fields that the connection that you're using in your Salesforce connector has access to in the Salesforce. And so that's always a great tip that I like to have. Then that way, if you're like, oh, well, I'm expecting to see this, but it's not here, then you can be double checking and seeing that everything is working well.
And correct me if I'm wrong, gang, but Tanisha, I think to do that, all you'd really need is you know, the auth or the credentials for that Salesforce sandbox, right? Like you wouldn't need to set up anything that new in FormAssembly or get a new or different FormAssembly instance or anything like that. So if you know those credentials, it's just a matter of, you know, creating something called test workflow, for instance, and hitting that configure step on the Salesforce piece of it and getting your credentials in there and having at it.
Yep, that is correct, which is awesome. It really is so easy to try things out, which I love. Leah's got, okay. So Leah, this is one of the clarifications. So Leah was familiar with household accounts from prior jobs with NPSP. The current job is built on Sales Cloud. Is this process possible to build into Sales Cloud? Okay. I'm gonna make, again, another general answer, knowing again that your org may be different. So technically no. And I frame it that way in the sense that that idea of a household is something particular to person accounts, because the idea is that you're trying to group together multiple persons under like a group, you know? Again, like if there's like 3 people in a household, you want to be able to talk about both the household and those 3 individual people. Accounts and contacts take away that need in almost every circumstance, because the account itself is the umbrella with the contacts underneath it. So there's really no need for a further big grouping. Now, with junction objects and custom objects, it is possible to build anything your heart desires in Salesforce. Again, it is wildly customizable. And in fact, I have built similar things before myself. So it is definitely possible to do, but that's why they don't really exist in the Sales Cloud one, because the account contact structure kind of just takes care of the majority of that. But that's a fun one to bring up to if you bring that up with any Salesforce admin and get them talking, that one gets so fun. Relationships are one of our favorite things to just ramble about. So that's like I said, a fun one to chatter about, and I'll stop myself before I talk about relationships for 6 hours. So Lauren, okay, we are FormAssembly and we love data. So I know that your question is not a FormAssembly question about the differences between reporting using accounts and contacts and party relationship groups. Yes, you're correct. That's not a FormAssembly question, but we love data here. So what I will say is that the most important thing with any Salesforce report and any Salesforce dashboard is what answer you want out of it. If the answer you want is what is the average ARR of accounts in a particular industry, you're going to use account-based reporting. If you want to know about something like maybe you have engagement fields, something that tracks engagement, and you want to know how engaged all of these various businesses that you work with are, you actually might want to use account-based reporting, again, with person accounts to bring in those persons who are both contacts and accounts, and use that account-based reporting to go across it. A party relationship group would be if you wanted to look at the donation amounts of, say, each group of person accounts, like maybe this group of person accounts, how much have they donated annually versus this group. So it's always best to start with the answer you're trying to get and work backwards from there, is the pro tip from we who love data. So I think this is the last one we have time for, but we've got one from Aurora saying, If I need to make updates to a more complex form assembly form by cloning it and connecting it to a sandbox, is there an easy way to push those changes from one form to another without having to swap out the form URL? There's a couple of answers for this. Joelle, I'll let you go first if there's any you want to chat about.
There is one that I really like. So cloning the form and making those changes is really very helpful so that you can test everything out. But I actually love using the custom URL feature. And if you are on our essential plans or higher, so those essentials, teams, enterprise, government plans, you can use a custom URL. And what that does is it replaces the form ID at the end of your link. And you can have that custom URL, embed it anywhere for the old form, and keep using that old form like normal. Then once you've tested out the clone form, got everything working, got it all updated, what you can do is, instead of having to go to where the form is embedded and changing all of that, you can just take that new form, take off the custom URL from the old one, and put the new custom URL on that new form. And so then that way, you're not having to change anywhere that it's embedded. You can have like your instance link slash that custom URL and just leave everything where it's embedded the same. You're just changing where that link is directed to that new form. And I love that custom URL. But I do know that there's several other ways to do that. Kayla, I know you know several cool ways.
Oh, that was my favorite too. I really like that one. It's so much easier. I really, really like that one. So here's the thing, right? It depends a little bit obviously on how you're using your forms and your workflows and things like that. But I do really like to note that in many circumstances, again, we allow for multiple forms to be, like, there's no limit on the number of forms you're making here. So unless the form is one that lives permanently inside your website or inside a portal or similar, at which point custom URL will always be my absolute favorite option here because it's the least impactful to anything. Very straightforward. I think it's important to remember that like your form, when you use it to collect data, say for a campaign, right? You can always clone that form, connect the cloned form to a sandbox, make any changes, and then this becomes your new production form for your next campaign. Because forms are something that are so powerful and so wonderful to use when they're collecting good data that I think it's so important to remember that with FormAssembly, with that ability to create as many forms as you want, an infinite number of forms, if you will, you can make it so that every single campaign is collecting specialized data. And you can just be cloning it, making those small changes, making little tweaks. You don't have to be constantly reusing, especially when you're connecting to Salesforce, especially when you're making those constant updates to your Salesforce org. And I know that seems like it's not a direct answer, but I like to remind people of it because it is one of the major benefits of FormAssembly, that ability to say, well, this form doesn't quite suit my current needs. Make a new form. Let's make another one. Let's collect even better data this time. Let's change this field that we're bringing in, and then let's do some A/B testing. Let's look how this form performed versus that form, which one had, which fields got filled out more often, which one had more errors or less, which one had a higher drop-off rate. So I know that's like, this is me just getting super excited in like data nerd mode right now. But yeah, I just want to bring up that that's one of my favorite things to do, is just to keep making more and more and more forms, especially when you can just clone it and make the tiny changes.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah. We're not capping you on form creation, and we're not capping you on form fills, so go for it, gang.
Yeah, well, I think that's all we've got time for today. But thank you guys so much for coming. And then I did see one last thing. This will be recorded, and you guys will be emailed a copy of this recording. So don't worry if you came in late, you'll still get to see everything once we send out that recording. But yeah, thank you guys for coming. Definitely check out that resources if you have any questions, or the previous webinars if you have any like that Salesforce and Repeatables one was a great resource. Anything that you guys would like to say in parting, Skylar, Kayla?
One, just, thanks again, Knowledge team, for coming in. The breadth and depth of Salesforce itself seems infinite at times to me, but also the kinds of things you can do and the ways FormAssembly can interact with it, just as flexible, right? Like the amount of stuff we've seen and set up over the past 20 years blows my mind. So thanks as always for coming in, having that kind of prior knowledge of what people have tried, what you've tried, and digging into topics like this. But one more shout out to those resource links you might see there. Not only are they relevant to today's topic, but they're a great jumping off point if we talked about something else, repeatables or something about our various connectors, any other functionality. Just type those keywords in at that help center, and you'll often get direct articles on getting started with what you're trying to do, if not carry it out completely, and a lot of images, kind of step by step, click by click for you there. So always love to shout out that the help center at FormAssembly. A lot of work goes into it. Yeah, that's it for me though. Thanks again. Unless anyone had something else to wrap up with, we'll be getting to work with other updates and more training coming up in the coming weeks. So stay tuned, everybody. Otherwise, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, see ya.